Right, so that's a good question because a lot of people would say that this is for adult use, this is adult use marijuana and we want to regulate it to keep it out of the hands of kids. And really when people say adult use marijuana, that's an oxymoron because marijuana is disproportionately used by young people. So we know, for example, that there are 2.4 million new users of marijuana in the United States every year, and of those 58% are under the age of 18. We also know that the peak prevalence for marijuana use occurs at age 20, followed by age 19, followed by age 18. So really it's young people who disproportionately use marijuana. And that's a big problem because young people still have a developing brain, and the very receptor in the brain that marijuana binds to helps control this brain development. So it's ironic that at the time when people are rushing to legalize marijuana, rushing to say it's not harmful, we actually have more information, more scientific data showing its harmfulness on the developing adolescent brain than we ever did have in the past. It's a good question. So in terms of the biggest myths that we see about it, one, that it's not addictive, and if it is addictive, it's only psychologically addictive, not physically addictive, and there's just no scientific debate anymore that marijuana is addictive, and both psychologically and physically. So we know that one in 6 people who tries it before the age of 18 becomes addicted to it. And actually that's an old number from several decades ago when people were using much less potent marijuana than they're using now. We know that overall 1 in 9 people who uses marijuana develops an addiction to it. I think there's also a myth out there that it's okay to drive under the influence of marijuana, and it's just no debate about that anymore either, that marijuana impairs very important skills that people need to drive safely. I think that, there's a myth out there that marijuana is healthy, natural, organic, not harmful for you, better for you than any medicine you could take. And we really know that, for adults who use marijuana frequently, which would be daily or almost daily, there are some very serious health effects in terms of over a 2-fold risk of having bronchitis, which is producing excessive mucus and coughing and wheezing, difficulty breathing. We know that in the hour after somebody uses marijuana, they have a 4-fold increased risk of having a heart attack. We also know that there's good reason to believe that marijuana may cause certain cancers, and so more research is needed in that as well. And then certainly for young people, we know that, as I mentioned, because of their developing adolescent brain, that exposure to marijuana during adolescence confers about a 2- to 4-fold increased risk of having psychosis, a break with reality, as an adult. So there's something about that adolescent exposure to marijuana that can permanently change brain development. We also know that adolescents who start using marijuana as adolescents continue using heavily into adulthood, have up to an 8-point drop in their IQ from age 13 to 38. And it appears that this is a permanent drop in IQ. So if people stop, at their 37th birthday, they can still have that drop in IQ if they started their exposure during their adolescent years. So there's lots of reasons to believe that marijuana is not a healthy thing either for adolescents or adults. That's a good question. There's just no debate about it that adolescents who use marijuana have a 2- to 4-fold increased risk of going on to using other substances. And that study has been replicated about a dozen times using literally 100,000 research subjects across the world. And so it's just, there's no debate about the gateway hypothesis that people who use marijuana are more likely to go on to use other substances. Where the debate lies in Why is that the case? Is it because if you know where to get marijuana, you also know where to get other substances? Is it because you're doing something to your brain that changes your brain chemistry to respond more favorably to other substances? Is it because people who have an underlying desire to do kind of risky things like use drugs will have that desire to use all drugs? It's probably a combination of all of those factors. But there really is no debate about the finding that's been replicated so many times that people who use marijuana are 2 to 3 times more likely to go on to use other substances. Excellent.
Well, prior to it becoming available as a medicinal product, we certainly saw it. It wasn't like it wasn't around. I think the biggest difference once it became legally available for medicinal purposes with an alleged prescription, we began to see it in those packages abundant in schools. And it seemed like immediately the access that kids had to pot went up from our perspective. I'll give you an example without naming names. It was about 3 years ago here, we had a kid we suspected of dealing here. He ran on us, and when our SRO actually caught him, and on him we found multiple packages from a medicinal shop. And so this student later on confessed that he'd stole them from his uncle who had been there. So anything that can go in a medicine cabinet, even if that is the true intent, becomes accessible from kids. So that was the first thing that we saw. Since then, of course, January 1st, it's now legalized beyond that medicinal capacity. And since then, we've seen an uptick. What's concerning for us as a school, I can't speak for the other schools in the county or even in the state, but for us, not only did we see an increase in the number of students coming to school under the influence, we saw an increase in repeat offenders. So in other words, usually, if a kid gets caught at school, if they're dealing drugs, sale or distribution, that's an expellable offense here. But if they're just under the influence, we suspend them. Then we require drug counseling and trying to help the kid and the family understand the ramifications of what they're doing. When you have repeat offenders, even if you're having those interventions, that's very concerning. It seems like, for a long time we were the butt of every joke on nighttime television. You'd watch, Jay Leno, or people just make fun of us. It's not real funny right now when you see a kid come in who's just ingested an edible, didn't know how much was in it, what the potency of that was, and they're literally having a panic attack, and we're calling 911. They feel like they're dying. So when you have that happen, regardless of where you are in this whole stance, it definitely changes your perspective very quickly. I've got a son, a 15-year-old, and our campaign has been to get parents to talk to their kids as much as possible, because we're not going to keep it from being available to them. We can't control that anymore. But what we can control is increasing their awareness to the dangers of some of this stuff. Not just the edibles, but certainly those. Another story, about 6 months ago, it was a Friday night, we had 3 of our kids in the emergency room. And there was a student here who partnered with a family member, and they baked marijuana cookies. Don't know if they knew what they were doing. I wouldn't know the recipe, but and then they were selling them here at school. And all of these kids had a very violent reaction to that. So imagine how scared these kids are when they literally think they're dying. They can't breathe. Multiple psychotic and physical reactions to ingesting large amounts of very potent marijuana. There's nothing pretty about it. Well, My biggest worry is that people have relaxed their position on it as a drug. In other words, it used to be something that we didn't tolerate. You know, that's not allowed. You don't do that. And so we have mores and values, and most of those were passed on from our parents and our neighbors and our extended community. When that perception begins to become relaxed, then some students don't see the harm. Well, what's the big deal? You know, it's legal. Well, it might be legal for 21-year-olds, but it doesn't make it legal for you at 15 or 16 or 14. So that's hard to combat. So we have, tried to take a real strong position early on of educating kids, educating parents, and making it well known that it may in fact be legal in the state, but it's more than illegal and dangerous for you to participate in consumption, especially at school. But I would say it's significant. Again, it wasn't like we didn't have this issue before. We did, but it's an increase in the number of kids that are under the influence, and it's a significant increase in the number of repeat offenders. That's a very small percentage, fortunately, of kids, but of that group, many of them have now been suspended and disciplined 2, 3, even 4 times, and are on the habitually disruptive path of losing the privilege to be at school. Well, just be thoughtful in your decision or your vote. I have an older brother who's very conservative, and we talk all the time about politics and just society in general. And he admits that he had no idea when he voted for this, the ramifications. He just didn't think it through. My wife and I are both high school administrators, and when we talked to him, he said, I didn't take that into consideration when I cast my vote. So regardless of your position, just understand that it's a game changer for schools and for kids, and most parents probably won't like the results that they're going to see.
Okay.
Yeah, I think when marijuana is socialized the way it is now, with advertising, even advertising against, being irresponsible with driving and the use of marijuana, it changes it. It elevates the attention that it gets. So it's certainly a hot topic. So I think kids feel much more free about talking about it. But at the same time, their expressions about it seem to be laissez-faire. They're not really concerned with it like perhaps they should be. We know about the research of an adolescent brain and what marijuana use can do to thwart the growth of the brain. They just see the fun in it. They see the cacophony of conversation around it. You can't open a newspaper in this town now and not see an ad about a marijuana shop. And so you would never, when I grew up, and I wasn't always in the library or in the choir, but you didn't see that. Now you see it all the time. You see billboards and magazines and newspapers and commercials. And so it was hard to get used to at first, being somebody in a position of authority that enforced the rules. And I think that has softened their view. I don't think they look at it as taboo. I think they just look at it as another thing that's out there on a menu of things that maybe aren't wise for them to use. So it's been disheartening to see that happen for kids. And they haven't been alive very long. We have, most of us. They haven't. So that's something I think that all parents and educators have struggled with. Yeah, in terms of the parents and of the accessibility, I'll give you some examples. We, like every high school, we have events. We have football games and basketball games and choir concerts and orchestra and band and musicals and all the great things that a healthy, positive high school environment has. And so one of the things that we've noticed is the number of adults that come to these contests, and we suspect that they may in fact be under the influence. Some of these adults are parents, some of them are just community members or somehow associated with our students or the contest or the opposing team. And that has been on the rise. So, you know, if you're smoking marijuana, it's a very pungent odor that is not easily covered up. And so it seems more the norm now, not necessarily at high school events, but certainly in public events where that smell will hit you. And that's different. So, you know, I think most of the accessibility for marijuana from our kids is not coming from a black market supplier or somebody out of the trunk of their car. It's coming from the parents or a family member who has access to it, is of age and can go purchase it legally now. And they're the ones that are supplying it to the kids. You know, one thing that we are getting that's interesting is we got a lot of kids that saying, I wasn't smoking, Mr. Lynch. I was not smoking. I was with them, but I was not. You know, the whole thing where, you know, they may smell, they may reek of marijuana, they may, you know, they may even have bloodshot eyes, but they, and there's been a few times where their parents have taken them and drug tested them to prove. I said, well, you can prove that all day long, but you were in the wrong place at the wrong time, doing the wrong thing. So we get a lot of that. That seems to be a lot more prevalent than it was before, where it gets on other kids' clothes and then they come in and they're smelling like it too. So, you know, the kids are kids. They really haven't changed. I think what scares me though is if this continues to be, if we continue to go down this path and we keep relaxing, you know, the mores or the values, that it's not seen as that big of a deal, and some people believe that, and that I guess they're entitled to that. Then I think use is going to go up, and the negative effect on learning, the negative effect on their brain development, and the disruption is and can be significant, and that concerns us.
Well, initially when it was passed in 2000, the concern was that this was just a stepping stone into going further and further into the legalization of marijuana. It was pretty restricted. They restricted patient, caregiver levels, etc. And then, just as we predicted, it just blossomed. And all of a sudden, now you have dispensaries. Now you have from 4,000 people with cards, over 100,000 people with cards. You go from people that had maybe glaucoma or cancer or whatever. Now you've got kids on skateboards that got pain in their toes or something like that, getting recommendations from the doctor. So it basically was the start of de facto legalization of marijuana, and all the things that we projected would happen did in fact happen. Impaired driving, traffic fatalities due to marijuana intoxication, increased use among our kids, hospital emergencies, kids being run to the hospital, kids poison control calls because of marijuana skyrocketing. So everything that they claimed wouldn't happen is exactly what did happen. And what is really troublesome is the fact that there are some drugs that are available that will take care of most of these things that are pharmaceutical. You have to have a doctor's prescription, but they put such a spin on things, and they use so much money that they actually buy people's votes, in my opinion. And out of compassion for the American voter is compassionate, and they think they're doing it out of compassion, and they're not informed. And generally the anti-side has better information, but they can't get the word out because they can't afford the same kind of money that the pro-marijuana side. Now, if you go back in the history of legalizing marijuana, and I can show you videotapes, exactly what they said they're going to pull at the heartstrings of people, use compassion, start wearing suits. If we get medical, we'll get full legalization. And in Colorado, that's exactly what happened. First of all, the kids, big factor. Greater use among the kids. We have fatalities have increased. I mean, traffic fatalities in Colorado during a period of time went down 116%. but they skyrocketed with marijuana impairment. So that means people dead. You have the kids, the attitude has changed, the perception of risk has gone down, use has gone up. You have these edibles that now kids are being rushed to emergency because of that. Actually, your animals are being impacted by it because they're eating the edibles. And of course, recently we had 2 deaths that are related to somebody ingesting animals. The student from Wyoming jumped off the balcony. So everything that is negative about legalization has in fact come to fruition. So the great thing for the state of Arkansas is just look at Colorado and learn from Colorado. Don't listen to rhetoric. Do not listen to rhetoric because they're good at it. Don't listen to spin. Look at the data and facts and make a decision based on that, and don't make a decision based on emotion because you'll be sorry. And this is all going to eventually, as soon as FDA approves 2 drugs, there's no reason for medical marijuana. And the one, Savatex, I think they're pretty close. And the other one for seizures of kids, they ought to be close. And they do have the ability to, those kids that have seizures can use that. That's the CBD. And so you can actually get that now through an experimental program. You need a doctor to agree to that. But so don't do it. You'll be sorry. And if you hold out, you'll be one of the states that can be proud that your kids are better off. You don't lose a generation of kids. Every state that said the same thing that whoever's saying that in Arkansas said the same thing. They said the same thing about California. Colorado said the same thing about Colorado. We're going to be tougher than California. And if you look at the drug use among kids, which ought to be a big concern among people from Arkansas, and you look at the medical marijuana states, every one of them has a higher rate. The top 10 are all medical marijuana states. And I believe, and we're going to be doing a study on this, that if you look at other drug abuse, that we're going to see the same thing with other drugs. The medical marijuana states are going to have a higher drug abuse because the factors that affect drug abuse are public attitude, the more tolerant the public is, the greater the use, and perception of risk. And when you do the medical marijuana, is that perception of risk, and what happens, then kids start looking for other drugs. Well, it's okay with marijuana. So I'm proud that Arkansas, where you are right now, I just pray that you just wait. You've waited this long, wait a couple more years and learn from Colorado. You don't need to do this. And I guarantee you'll be sorry. That hasn't happened either. I mean, 2 things have happened. You still have a black market, and Colorado retail stores and Colorado's law has become the black market for other states because of the diversion of Colorado marijuana is skyrocketing. I mean, we've kept track of that too. It's gone up like quadruple of marijuana. It's going from Colorado to Iowa, Missouri, Florida, Texas, Oklahoma, and we're probably picking up about 2 tons last year. Almost 2 tons. We're probably picking up about 10% of what's coming out. So we've become the black market. So not only did it not eliminate the black market, we become the black market. And I'm sure Missouri and some of the other states, Nebraska, appreciate that. Yeah, one of the things that we're concerned about in Colorado, and we're starting to get information on it, and there's some indication, is this is the perfect storm. And what I mean the perfect storm is you're dealing in marijuana legally, and you're making lots of money. No doubt about these stores are making lots of money, the cultivation sites. So if you're a cartel member, and you look at this, why would you not come in and say, look, I can't get a license, but you're doing all this legally, I want 40% of your profits. And you're going to say, no, I put my money, my time, my sweat into this, you're not getting it. And then I show you a picture of your daughter going to school and tell you, look, either you give me 40% or your daughter, you won't see your daughter anymore. Extortion is probably the, if not the biggest, #2 moneymaker for cartels. So why wouldn't you, and what are the people going to do? They're going to report it to cops? There's no way they're going to do it. So it's the perfect storm for having cartels come in, make easy money through extortion. That casino that blew up in Mexico City, 52 people, that wasn't drugs for the cartel. That was extortion. Casino didn't want to do it, they blew them up. So that's a major concern, and already we have Mexican drug trafficking organizations here. Why would they not do that? You know, and then to take some of these cultivation sites and go through the back door. They don't have to worry about crossing the border. I'm right here in Colorado. Pay somebody to drive it to Iowa, which they're doing now. You know, 201. The last guy we saw was like $200. I forget where he was driving. That's what he got paid to drive a load. So it's everything. I can't think of anything good about the whole thing. You know, I mean, you know, you give me the positives versus all the potential negatives, and I can't think of a whole lot of positives. We're going to smoke our medication. It's a good thing. Yeah. And all you have to do is look at the studies. You know, don't take my word for it. I challenge people. If you look at all the studies about the adverse impact of marijuana, and then tell me Columbia University, tell me Stanford, tell me the Johns Hopkins Medical School, they're not credible. You'd have to convince me of that. Because every study that you look at that's credible, that's not junk science, tells you marijuana is not a positive thing. Yeah, that's an interesting. It's interesting, and we don't. The indications are that this is going to free up cops, right? This is going to free us up to do things other than put people in jail, which we don't do anyway for marijuana possession. And what we're starting to find out and talking to law enforcement and police agencies and sheriff's department, it's just the opposite is true. It's costing them more time, more complaints, more responding to this. And my neighbor's done this, unlawful grows. So what was supposed to free us up is having the opposite impact, which is really frustrating because the cops, and there's not a lot they can do about it, but they have to respond. But then are you going to get a prosecution? If you seize their marijuana, you're going to have to give it back. And then if I give it back, I can't because it's against federal law. Which is another thing, too, is you have to think about they are authorizing people to violate federal law. So all these dispensaries, under federal law, whether they enforce it or not, they are criminal enterprises. And how do we tell our kids, we want you to respect the law, we're a country of the law, but you know what, we're going to license you to violate the law, commit felonies. So for a cop to give back the marijuana actually is a felony, so they can't. So then they make you pay for it. So now I'm paying because I took your medication away from it, and I got to pay you for it. And that's a real dilemma for law enforcement. And remember that all of us, including legislators and city council and cops, have taken an oath to uphold the law. We're not doing it. We're violating our oath. How do you want us to be ethical when you tell us to violate our oath of office? Can't do it. Can't have it both ways. What Arkansas's ability to do now is to start getting good data collection mechanism. So when people say these things, you have data to say, no, that's not true. No, this in fact did happen. Colorado, we're struggling to come up with a kind of data that would help states like Arkansas, and it would have been nice to have these systems in place so that we can really be honest. And when you talk to youth, we got to be honest about drug abuse. Can't lie to them. You lose your credibility, but we need to have the facts and figures to back it up and not give them the scare tactics. But here, you have to make a decision, young man or young lady. Here are the facts. You make the decision based on that, not the rhetoric or the spin that you get from the other side. The biggest lesson learned, and I've been involved our way from California, you can't outspend them. You can't out-advertise them. You can't out-inform the public by thinking we're going to raise money or we're going to put ads on television. And so what you end up doing is doing a couple service club debates. You reach a very small portion of people. So what you have to do, if Arkansas is going to win this, they can win it. But it's got to be a massive grassroots campaign. People have to realize, in the interest of public safety and health, we don't want this in our state. And so you know what? You've got to get people on the grassroots, give them good information, train them, and get them out there, and that can win it for you. But you're never going to outspend them. You're never going to out-advertise them. So that's what you're fighting against. The only way to win that is by a good grassroots. It's got to start today. And every drug cop, every school teacher, every nurse, they can't just stick their head in the sand. The problem with what we're fighting is that people like us have jobs, we're coaching Little League, we've got families, very responsible, right? Go to church on Sunday, and the other side has big money. So our side needs to say, you know what, this is important enough to us. This is the future of our kids. We're going to lose a whole generation here in Colorado, IQ-wise, brain development-wise, etc. We're not going to let this happen, and so you've got to motivate them to get out. We can do this. Let's show what we can do as a group of people. I mean, what a neat message that would be. Arkansas can do it. We're not going to let this happen. We're not going to let these George Soroses of this out-of-state money come in and tell us what to do in our state, which I'm not here. I mean, I'm hoping Arkansas. I would applaud that. And I would give other states an opportunity to say, you know what, there's hope. We can do this. We can learn from Arkansas.
Traffic fatalities, where marijuana is the primary drug, that's been increasing in our state. Overall, traffic fatalities are going down, but the number of fatalities where somebody's under the influence of marijuana is up. The rate of youth using marijuana is 30% higher than the national average. The rate of adults using marijuana is almost 50% higher than the national average. Schools are inundated with marijuana problems. Kids are bringing these products to school. A lot of times the superintendents and school officials are having no choice but to expel kids because they're not getting off marijuana, and they're telling the schools that they're chronic users and they're not going to stop. So I heard at one point that the Colorado Department of Health, or I'm sorry, Department of Education, said that marijuana expulsions that was the #1 reason kids were getting expelled in Colorado over guns, weapons, alcohol, over everything was marijuana. I looked at some of the statistics in my area, and our school resource officers were spending anywhere from 30 to 60% of their time on marijuana related issues in the school. And as a single type of event, that was the largest single event type that they dealt with. So the schools are getting inundated. We're seeing very bizarre behavior from people that are consuming marijuana edibles, infused edibles. These are candy bars, cookies, things like that. We had a 19-year-old college student came to Colorado for spring break. He consumed some of these edibles, and for whatever reason it affected his mind, and he jumped off of a balcony at a hotel and killed himself. A couple of weeks later, a man also consuming marijuana edibles grabbed a gun, killed his wife in front of their kids. This was all within a couple of weeks or a few days time period. In order to make some of these edibles or to get a really highly concentrated form of THC, people are doing what's called hash oil extraction. And that's where you take marijuana and you pour butane through some kind of a cylinder that contains it. Well, the room fills up with these fumes, and when they try to boil off the solvents, it oftentimes ignites and explodes. So we've had people blowing themselves up in their homes, multiple incidents of that over the last year, dozens of them in fact. So it's manifesting itself in a whole bunch of different ways. It's a very big problem, and it's a sad thing that Colorado has gone through this. Schools, the impact at schools is not just the students. We have principals reporting that when they have school events like a sporting event or something, a basketball game, parents are showing up in high numbers, stoned, obviously stoned. So in fact, when you go anywhere in Colorado right now, you take your kids to the local hamburger stand or something, people in line are just reeking of marijuana. You get on an elevator at a hotel, people are reeking of marijuana. Everywhere you go, it seems like there's people using, and it's just very much out in the open, and it's in everyone's face. But I really do think the lesson of Colorado is going to be legalization of marijuana is a really bad idea, and people shouldn't go that way.